Alrighty. There we go. All right. So we all know what wave interference is. It happens with sound waves, water waves, radio waves. It's what occurs when two waves meet while traveling along the same medium. There are two types of interference. You got constructive interference and destructive interference. Constructive means that they match up. Peaks and valleys, they're in sync. Destructive means they totally cancel each other out. Make nothing. All right, here's another version of that. This can happen with water waves too. You can see the constructive interference and destructive interference here and here. Actually, this video displays it better. You see two waves colliding with each other, and they form these channels here. There are no waves here. There's waves here that are stronger than normal. All right. Are particles also waves? Subatomic particles such as electrons and photons actually behave like both particles and waves. Sometimes actually described as wavicles, which I found out today. It's kind of funny sounding to me. The double slit experiment showed this. This was by an English physicist named Thomas Young in the 1800s. What he did was he set up a barrier with two tall, narrow slits where he sent a wave of water through. And here, it blocked most of the wave, but what got through split into two smaller waves that interacted with each other and created this cool-looking interference pattern. You can see, like here, the white spots, those is where it's got stronger, and outside, like here, is where it got canceled out. Kind of shows up on the back screen here, too. He was also later able to do this using light, confirming its wave-like properties. You can see the interference pattern here. It's another example. All right, so in the 1900s, scientists decided to expand on this, and they did a version of it where they fired one electron at a time at a barrier with two slits in it, a double slit experiment, one at a time. And this actually ended up with an unexpected result. This also created an interference pattern, even though a single electron should not have anything else to interfere with. It shouldn't have, you know, like two waves colliding. That's not the situation here. So you can see it actually recorded each place that it hit. Eventually, it came up with this interference pattern as if two waves were meeting. So as a metaphor, imagine being in a bowling alley. You turn around, and balls are randomly thrown into the left and right gutters only. But you turn around, and some of the pins have still been knocked down in this pattern here. That's an interference pattern. Unlike water waves, electrons are supposed to be single bits of matter that can't be broken down into smaller parts. They have some wave-like properties, but each electron strikes the screen at a single definitive spot. So they came up with a hypothesis to explain this, that each electron must start and end as a particle, but while it's going through the double slits, for some reason, act as a wave and interfere with itself. It's a very confusing and convoluted explanation, but when it comes down to it, when they say turn into a wave of what? A wave of probability. So, the distribution of likely positions in space where a particle could end up once its location is pinpointed is its probability wave. This is also known as a waveform. So for example here, when you have two waves interfering with each other, here it's like the back wall with the white and black stripes. This is where a particle is most likely to end up. This is slightly less likely, this is less likely, this is extremely not likely, and it goes on like that actually for infinity. So we don't need to worry about that. Skip that. Okay, so they decided to do this experiment another time a little bit differently. They decided to try and peek and see which slit the electrons went through, like what each electron went through, the left slit or the right slit. So they set up a detector near the slits in order to determine this. However, when the experiment was done, the way the interference pattern, when the experiment was done in this manner with the detector, the interference pattern did not appear. The electrons simply formed two sets of random clumps on the screen instead of the interference pattern you would expect. How could this be? Shockingly, they came to the conclusion that simply observing The electrons force their waveforms to collapse into single particles when observed. When you observe each electron, it instantaneously collapses and changes from a waveform back into a particle. It has to be somewhere, so it's located as a particle. In other words, the mere act of watching a particle causes it to exist. Without observation, it exists only as a wave of probability where it actually is. All right. Here's a shorthand way of thinking about it. This is an actual YouTube comment I found out while researching about this. Wow, this is exactly what happens when I pee. If I watch it, it goes straight into the toilet. If I turn my head and look away, it goes everywhere. I realized after I read this, I could have just put this up for 5 minutes and it would have pretty much explained it. Anyway, so the quantum double eraser experiment. Further delving into this, they modified the experiment. Again, this is super complicated. I'm not going to bore you with the details. But here's how it goes. So it's exactly like the double slit experiment, except at the two slits, each group of photons is split into two copies. Here's two copies, here's two copies. And how they set it up is that they can see which of the two slits it went through here and here. So you see it moving through, there's one photon, it got split into two, and then focused here on the screen. And the copy that went down this way lights up the detector. And so forth. So, when the scientists knew which slit it went through, where it was located, they got this pattern, a random distribution, not the interference pattern, just a random clump, as if they were acting as particles. Then they added in the quantum eraser. What this did is that they added beam splitters that made it a 50-50 chance that they would pass through or a 50-50 chance they'd be reflected. So, if they made it down here and registered at C or D, neither of these could tell which slit the particle came from. So, what happened is this. When the particles lit up C and D, you can see it can go to either one. When the particles lit up C and D and the experimenters did not know which slit it went through, it got this interference pattern here because they stayed as their waveforms. It did not become particles. Conclusions. Observing or scrambling the which way information about which slit a particle wave or a particle went through retroactively causes each particle's waveform to collapse or not collapse, respectively, in the past. This may play into what Einstein was referring to when he gave his famous description of these sorts of quantum mechanics, spooky action at a distance. Basically, it sums up to this. Ultimately, something only exists if we are conscious of it, observing it. The universe creates us, and we create the universe. In other words, the universe is yoked by consciousness. Thank you.